Hello, this is Y490, Politics of the Internet. This lecture deals with the politics of net neutrality. The net neutrality debate originated when the Coalition of Broadband Users and Innovators, the CBUI, sent a letter to the Federal Communications Commission Chairman Michael Powell in November 2002. In the letter, there was the phrase net neutrality, which was first coined by Tim Wu in an article written in 2002 and published in 2003. The letter called for non-discrimination safeguards to guarantee net neutrality. What is net neutrality? According to Larry Lessig and Robert McChesney, net neutrality simply means that all like internet content must be treated alike and move at the same speed over the network. The owners of the internet's wires cannot discriminate. This is the simple but brilliant end-to-end design of the internet that has made it such a powerful force for economic and social good. This definition by Lessig and McChesney is not completely unchallenged or unambiguous. So let's talk a little bit about the definition. According to Ellie Noam, there are at least six possible meanings of the phrase. It could mean no different quality grades for service, no price discrimination among internet providers, no monopoly price charged to content and application providers, no discrimination against content providers who compete with the carrier's own content, no selectivity by carriers over the content that they transmit, and no blocking of access of users to some websites. So the last two in particular could be interpreted as being threats to freedom of speech. So in many ways, they are the most political of the possible meanings that Noam identified. The proponents of net neutrality have argued that the end-to-end architecture of the internet must be preserved. This requires preventing discrimination by conduit companies against content and services that they do not control. So basically the problem is that the original design of the internet was that any node on the internet can reach any other node, and that there shouldn't be that much difference from user to user about how that occurs. The efficiency of the internet depends a lot on the preservation of end-to-end architecture. The conduit companies, according to the proponents of net neutrality, will reserve lots of bandwidth for services that are likely to produce pay for them, such as cable TV services that could possibly degrade internet performance for everyone else. And so the question is, how do you prevent that from happening? One of the proponents is Vint Cerf, one of the founders of the internet. Congress and the FCC have been encouraging telephone and cable companies to compete for providing broadband services. In the Telecom Act of 1996, that is specifically part of the legislation. The FCC's decisions to permit telephone companies to buy cable networks and cable operators to compete in telephone markets is an evidence for the desire of the FCC to see more competition in the provision of advanced telecommunications services. The FCC wanted telcos and cable companies to compete in high-speed internet and cable TV services via new fiber optic networks built without government subsidies. The top internet service providers in the USA are primarily telephone companies and cable companies. So the top 7 in this case are Comcast, Time Warner, AT&T, Cox, Optimum, Charter, and Verizon. So AT&T and Verizon are telephone companies, and the rest are cable operators. In terms of websites, providers of web services and web-based software, these are the top players: Google, Facebook, YouTube, Yahoo, Wikipedia, Baidu, which is the Chinese equivalent of Google, Blogspot, and Twitter. In 2004, the chairman of the FCC, Michael Powell, issued a document which talked about the guaranteeing of internet freedoms. He listed 4: the freedom to access content, the freedom to use applications, the freedom to attach personal devices, the freedom to obtain service plan information. In 2005, the FCC adopted a policy statement which incorporated some of the ideas that Michael Powell introduced, but with some provisos. Consumers would be entitled to access the lawful internet content of their choice, not unlawful content. Consumers are entitled to run applications and services of their choice subject to the needs of law enforcement. Consumers are entitled to connect their choice of legal devices that do not harm the network. And consumers are entitled to competition among network providers, application and service providers, and content providers. The proponents of net neutrality have also argued that there is insufficient competition between cable operators and telcos to guarantee non-discrimination. There is also potential for violation of freedom of speech in the absence of net neutrality guarantees. So 3 of these proponents, besides Vint Cerf, are Gigi Sohn of Public Knowledge, Larry Lessig, a law school professor, and Tim Berners-Lee, one of the creators of the World Wide Web. Other organizations that support net neutrality are the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ALA, the American Library Association, the Christian Coalition, the Gun Owners of America, Consumers Union, Google, Amazon, Yahoo, and the American Electronics Association. Opponents, which include primarily the telephone companies and the cable companies, but also a few internet pioneers like Dave Farber, are opposed for a variety of reasons. First of all, they say that net neutrality guarantees would constitute unnecessary regulation. They claim that the threat of discrimination is overblown, that cable and telephone companies need new revenues to build out the network, that they need to have the capability of building intelligent networks to obtain or to guarantee quality of service to customers. The basic bare bones internet would be called a dumb network in contrast, because it doesn't take into account the kind of content being carried, or not that much anyway. And that competition is sufficient to prevent abuses. So in 2006, a piece of legislation called the Video Franchise Bill was introduced, and in the House, Congressman Ed Markey from Massachusetts added a net neutrality amendment, which failed in committee and then was reintroduced on the floor and failed the floor vote. A net neutrality amendment was proposed by Senator Olympia Snowe, Republican from Maine, in the Telecommunications Committee of the Senate, and that failed in an 11-11 vote. So Senator Ted Stevens, who was chair of that committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, I believe it was, Republican of Alaska, voted against the amendment. He became a symbol of the opponents later on, and in particular because he made a statement which I'm going to read. And again, the internet is not something you just dump something on. It's not a big truck. It's a series of tubes. And if you don't understand, those tubes can be filled, and if they are filled, when you put your message in, it gets in line, and it's going to be delayed by anyone that puts into that tube enormous amounts of material. Well, this statement was greatly parodied in a number of videos and in postings to the web. The statement was made on June 28, 2006. Most of the proponents of net neutrality considered this as evidence of Senator Stevens' lack of knowledge about how the internet actually worked. At one point, he said that he received an internet, by which he meant an email from his staff. So the reaction to Stevens' statement was pretty extensive, and you can see how the traffic on that reflects that in the early days of July. So in 2006, a lot of lobbying was done on the Video Franchise Act, most of it paid for by the telephone and cable interests, and only with somewhat lesser attention from the internet service providers, internet application and search company firms such as Google, Yahoo, eBay, Microsoft, and Amazon. The total amount was $51 million, and only 9 of that came from internet companies. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon used his senatorial privilege to place a hold on the video franchise bill because of the absence of net neutrality guarantees. Since Senator Ted Stevens did not have the 60 votes needed to override the hold, the bill was not put up for a vote on the Senate floor and therefore did not pass. In the process of fighting against these, fighting for net neutrality guarantees, the opponents won the support of the Democratic Party and the Democratic candidate for election, Senator Barack Obama. Obama gave a speech on net neutrality at Google in 2007 in which he announced that he favored net neutrality guarantees. The issue of net neutrality became part of the official Democratic Party platform in 2008 and was reaffirmed by the Obama campaign as an important issue for the election. After Obama was elected, he appointed Julius Genachowski to be head of the FCC. He also favored an addition of $7.2 billion to the American Recovery and Investment Act of 2009 to pay for building out broadband infrastructure and also mandating that the FCC prepare a national broadband plan. In 2005, after the election, Genachowski added 2 items to the FCC policy statement of 2005. So that broadband providers cannot discriminate against particular internet content or applications, and the providers of broadband internet access must be transparent about their network management processes. Genachowski was reacting here to something that had occurred prior to the 2008 election. In 2007, it was discovered by a fellow named Rob Topolsky that Comcast was delaying the delivery of BitTorrent files to its internet service provider customers. And he found this out because he was trying to share files of the barbershop quartet music that was created by his quartet. You can see that their picture. He's the guy on the left. Anyway, having consistent problems with delivering these files using BitTorrent, he decided to look into it and discovered that there was something going on with Comcast that needed to be looked into more carefully. He published this on the Torrent Freak blog, and then the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the American Associated Press did independent investigations in which they verified Topolsky's finding. I think they used the Bible, transmission of the Bible, which is not covered by copyright laws, to see if, using BitTorrent to see if they had the same problems, and they did. It turns out that Comcast was using a thing called traffic shaping, using a software application called Sandvine, which looks for seeds, evidence of BitTorrent traffic in the data stream, and then slows them down or stops them. The FCC, once it was told this, told Comcast that was not okay to do that, that it needed to stop doing it. And Comcast complied, but then appealed to the courts in a lawsuit. That lawsuit took until April 2010 to be decided in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia. It was ruled that the FCC did not have the authority to regulate internet service providers under the Telecom Act of 1996, and that therefore Comcast was not bound to obey FCC rules regarding traffic management. This ruling was based on an earlier FCC decision to reclassify cable modems and DSL as information services, not communication services. The National Broadband Plan came out a little bit over a year after the election of Obama to the presidency, and the FCC announced its intention of guaranteeing net neutrality in spite of the Comcast ruling. Janikowski spoke of a third way between heavy-handed prescriptive regulation and the light touch approach of the past. He said that the FCC would attempt to reclassify the transmission component of broadband as a telecommunications service, not an information service, which would then make it legal to regulate. So net neutrality was framed by Republicans as a regulatory issue, an issue of regulation, and particularly of unnecessary regulation. That was a very simple frame, and it worked very well for them, at least until June 2006, when people started to realize that they might not be able to get access to certain services or information on the internet. And then the opposition, people who were in favor of net neutrality suddenly began to have more and more influence. The positive results for the Democrats in the 2006 and 2008 elections meant that they and their allies would attempt to pass legislation guaranteeing net neutrality. However, the Comcast ruling and continued strong Republican opposition made legislative action very difficult or unlikely. And so it was not clear whether the FCC strategy announced after the broadband plan was issued to reclassify broadband transmission would work. A lot of things have happened since then, but I'll talk about them in later lectures.